Hey folks, Eric from Hit Subscribe here, and today I am doing yet another installment of the freelancer Q&A series that I've been doing here for quite a while now. On last week's installment of this, and I'll put a link up for YouTube, I started to answer, somebody had written in asking about three different niches. And in last week's edition, I started with the one that was, I think, maybe furthest from being viable in the market. So this week, I'm going to tackle the next one that I like a little bit better than the last one, at least right out of the gate. And for any of you who don't know what I'm doing, just as a reminder, some years back, I was writing a lot of content about how to discover niches and how to specialize and so on and so forth. And I kind of threw the idea out to the audience to say it's probably a lot easier to do like case studies, if you will, of these things than to talk about finding niches in the abstract. So the readership was good enough to write in with a whole bunch of ideas that they had and wanted me to go over. And then I was not good enough to respond to those because, I mean, I had a kid. I don't really feel like too bad about that, but I got pretty busy and didn't have time to create that content. So here, like 3 years later, I'm trying to rectify that situation, albeit in a slightly different medium. So this is me kicking around ideas that people have submitted for possible niches for like consulting or freelancing or indie businesshood. Anyway, with that preamble out of the way, the niche that we're talking about here, the second idea that this person had was the way he phrased it is, I help fledgling product teams make strategic decisions about front-end code bases that result in easier to maintain systems. And actually, this resonates a lot with me personally, because in a way, this could actually describe part of my technical management consulting practice. I would go in and help organizations make decisions about their application portfolios, not front end code bases. Usually they were either a mix or they were more like on the back end, .NET code bases, Java code bases. So anyway, I have insight into this from having done this. And this is the position from which I say, looking back at what I was doing when I knew a lot less about marketing and establishing businesses all these years ago, this was pretty hard for me to do. I like this one better than the last one because it's a little better segmented. And I think it's a little further along maturity wise in terms of like marketing and stuff, but not by a ton. And I say that with some love here because this was my situation. When I had my management consulting practice, I didn't really do much of a job selling or market. Well, I mean, I sold, but marketing, it was difficult because I was out there trying to figure out how to explain like, oh, I can help you make hard decisions. That doesn't really resonate with anyone. So usually the way I was acquiring business was word of mouth, people that had worked with me before, often executives who I had helped make a difficult decision would introduce me to other people in a similar kind of role or something that they knew were struggling. So other people could kind of articulate and have these Rolodex moments, but in terms of like standing up a meaningful website or being able to market this to a broader audience, I never really found success there. And looking back, all these years later, having started and run a marketing business for a long time, I very much understand why that is now. So if 2023, almost 2024, Eric could go back and talk to like 2016, Eric, I would tell that older version of me some of the same things that I'll say here today. So I help fledgling product teams make strategic decisions about front-end code bases that result in easier to maintain systems. I do like this because it does segment the audience and the buyers to some extent. So what we know about these folks is that for some reason or another, the product team that they're on or part of or running is a new product team. Maybe it's because there's a new product out there. We know that they're operating in front-end code bases, so we know something about the engineers that are on the project. So this is already a better way than the thing we had talked about last week was like designing automation systems that would help developers in QA. In that world, we don't know nothing. We don't even know if they're developers or QA. In this world, we can start to reason about these people. They are on a newly assembled team. Maybe they're more on the newer end of the spectrum in terms of their skill set. So this team has been newly assembled and it's to write some front-end code, specifically some kind of front-end product code. It's not line of business or glue code. So that makes marketing and thinking about segmentation an easier problem, although not totally easy. And I'll get into that here more in a little bit. But the thing we've got here compared to last week too, where the value proposition was saving toil, like a little bit of cost savings. Maintainability is still a fairly weak value proposition, I would say. And I know a lot of people out there are screaming at me, if you've lived your life in legacy code bases, what do you mean it's a weak value proposition? I'll get into that in a second when it comes to marketing. It's just not really going to strike home with anybody. Kind of like last week, I talked about like a little bit of cost savings, not powerfully motivating executives. The idea of maintainability, meaning that your code is slightly easier to change down the line somewhere. If I'm running a large organization, that's not super exciting to me in and of itself, because I figure, well, okay, if it's a little bit harder to maintain, I just throw an extra engineer at it. And like, in terms of the P&L overall for the organization, that's not really a big deal. It's not a particularly compelling problem to solve. I mean, I would rather the code be more than less maintainable, but you're not really lighting a fire under me that's a powerful motivator and a problem I need to solve. So the value proposition is a little bit weak in that, like, oh, okay, especially if this is a newly assembled team and we're in the early going of prototyping and trying to ship early features, like, what do I really care about maintainability? It's not to say that I shouldn't, it's just that you would have to do some convincing of your audience for that. So with that in mind, let me kind of pick this apart a little bit from a sales and marketing perspective, which the reason I've been doing that with these videos is sales and marketing positioning is going to be your biggest problem. If you're doing something that actually helps people, like if you're coming at these niches or these ideas or specializations based on things that you've done in the past, it's safe to assume that there was a reason somebody wanted that to be done. So the work is probably valuable. And thus your biggest challenge is going to be finding other situations where that same work is valuable, which means sales and marketing, getting out there to the market, seeing what the demand is like. So I think in most cases, I'm really going to be looking at this critically from a sales and marketing perspective. How are you going to win business and stay in business? So let's look at this. There's some product team full of engineers and maybe like a product manager, a scrum master, or product owner. So some flavor of a team of that nature. You've got a product person, maybe more than one, some developers, maybe some QA. So you have a team that's going to be shipping features in a front end code base. So some kind of web application or maybe like a mobile application of some kind. Now you're saying that you're going to come in and help them make strategic decisions. And I'll get into this a little bit more in what I do to refine this, but like what strategic decisions, like technology selection. So first and foremost, you might struggle a little in marketing and sales to like even help them understand what you do. But let me set that aside for a moment. The first thing that I would see as a challenge here is, if I'm a developer on that team, why do I need some outsider to help me make strategic decisions about the code base, like what design patterns to use or what libraries to use or whatever? If I'm a developer, at least some set of them will probably, if not outright resent this, think it's superfluous or unnecessary, which means that from a marketing perspective, when you're thinking about personas that are involved in a buying decision, this is known as a blocker. So you have a decision maker and a buyer, an economic buyer when it comes to purchases, but there are other people that can be involved in a buying decision. One of those is known as an influencer. And in most organizations, developers or especially architects are typically influencers. So if your organization is thinking of adopting some kind of new IDE or something, it's usually not going to be down to the developers to make that purchase. That's going to be decided at the department level. But if they're smart, anybody that's an executive or whoever's making this purchase decision is going to get buy-in from the people that will be the end users of the product. And in that capacity, you become an influencer. Those people are influencers. And if they're influencers that like you, they're called champions. If they're influencers that do not like you, they're called blockers. So you coming in and making decisions on behalf of software engineers is liable to turn those software engineers into blockers. So the first thing to overcome is this idea that the developers and the architects and maybe the dev manager will have of, what do I even need this outsider for? We can handle all of this in-house. We're perfectly capable of making strategic decisions about our code base. We're perfectly capable of maintaining or creating a maintainable code base. So your first marketing and positioning objection to overcome is why you, Why can't this just be handled internally? So you would need a story for that, both for the economic buyer, who's probably a director or a VP or an exec of some kind, and also for those people. If you're going to be in there, like they're going to be the ones picking up your recommendations and executing them. So you need a compelling reason that you're more expert or more equipped to make some of these decisions than they are. And I would implore you not to reason that you're just really good at front end development. That just, it's not compelling. Everybody's going to say that about themselves. Maybe sometimes it'll even be true. It doesn't matter. It would be something that's more objective in nature, like, for instance, that you've helped 20 other organizations make this decision, or you've helped a bunch of organizations make the decision to this result, or and so on down the line. It would get into the abstract here, but the most compelling way that you can qualify yourself as somebody who should make this decision is past work that you can showcase, trial by fire, if you will. You've been in there in the trenches making these decisions to a great effect. You have a lot of people singing your praise on making decisions. The next thing you're going to struggle to overcome is, let's assume that you come up, maybe you're just known as the foremost code-based front-end code-based decision maker or something, and people do buy in. Now, the executive, you're going to have to get this person to buy in too. So everybody's like, oh, you've got this really like compelling blog about front-end technologies, super knowledgeable or whatever. Maybe they even turn into champions and they want to bring you in and they tell the VP of engineering how awesome you are. Now, if I'm the VP of engineering, number one, this is a nascent product team. I have to be convinced that I should really even be worried about maintainability down the line. Number two, I need to be convinced that this isn't a problem I can just solve in-house. So if a bunch of my engineers are going to come to me and say, we're super worried that we're going to create an unmaintainable mess, as the VP, I might be now having staffing concerns like, do you need some training? Have I hired the wrong people? Why are you all going to make a mess? Why do you need somebody to come in and be an expert in you not making a mess? So you're going to need to convince this executive that this is a problem that can't be solved in-house with personnel decisions, with training, with selecting of the right tools, etc. Again, putting myself in that VP's shoes, like they come to me and say they're going to, we're worried about maintainability. Well, then make it maintainable. So, it might just be something as simple as that. You have to really kind of establish a reason that teams would fail to make things maintainable, and it should be a compelling no-fault kind of reason. The easiest example, I guess, that I can think of is like you're under a lot of delivery pressure in the early going to get a proof of concept to market or something. So it's understandable that a mess will be made. I can help you mitigate that. So what I'm getting at is you would need for the executives and the team a narrative as to why it's understandable that they're making some kind of mess, so that the result isn't just, the executive saying like, well, if I'm not hiring people that can write maintainable code, what am I even doing? And then finally, what you've talked about, the idea of early stage product teams, fledgling product teams, suggests to me this kind of rapid prototyping situation. Why would they even care about maintainability? Can't they just scrap it and write a version 2? Or can't they bring in specialists at a later date when they're not fledgling to sort of start to instrument and work towards maintainability at that point? I'm not advocating for that myself. I'm saying those are the objections you're going to have to overcome. So this in and of itself could be a hard sales conversation to have. It'll be hard to marketing. I mean, the segmentation here is good. Like, people will recognize when they're on a fledgling team. People will recognize that they're participating in a front-end code base. They'll maybe even recognize when there's important strategic decisions to be made in the early going. So that's good. You will have people that are able to raise their hand and understand when they're in your target market. The part that's lacking here is the clear indication of why they should bring you in as an outsider and pay you to do anything. So let me flip from there into how I might refine this, because I do think that this is the ember of a possible good niche here and a good business that you have. So the first thing I would start to do, since you've already kind of segmented the persona, is iterate a little bit on this. So fledgling product teams in need of making strategic decisions, why are they fledgling? Is it because this is a brand new product startup? If so, are we talking about a bootstrap startup, or is it a venture-backed startup? Or alternatively, is it a fledgling product team within a large organization? So you're in the enterprise, and some kind of new program has been defined, and there's 5 or 6 new like Scrum teams in this program, and they've these group of people are working together for the first time on a new initiative, because those things are wildly different. Everything I just listed, you would market to a bootstrapped fledgling product team in a much different way than one that was venture backed, and in a wildly different way than one that was just assembled within enterprise from shared services app dev departments or something like that. So start to iterate a little bit and refine a little bit on who these teams are and why are they newly formed? How did they come to be formed? So that's the first thing I would do. Now, just for the sake of discussion for the rest of the posts, let's say that it's, startups that have just received an A round of funding. So before it was a couple of founders, and then they just received a round of funding, and suddenly they have the bandwidth to hire a team of engineers. All of these folks have been newly hired. Now your marketing gets even easier because you're just out there on Crunchbase looking for people that have raised an A round of funding. You're going to look at what they're doing. Is it a web app and a SaaS? If so, there's your target market. You can start marketing to them. Now, once you've zoomed in on the persona a little bit, like who this organization is and what they're doing, it gets a little bit easier to start refining the value proposition. So if we're talking about a venture-backed startup and you're saying, well, I can help you make strategic decisions that will result in easier to maintain code. Okay, if I'm rushing to get to market and get something out there and get daily active users or whatever I'm measuring to raise my next round of funding, I'm not super concerned about maintainability the way an enterprise would. That said, I don't want to create such a mess that I'm tripping over myself in like 3 months trying to ship new features. You are going to have to rapidly iterate and ship new features in the early going. And also, you're going to have to be in a position where you can respond quickly to the market. So what I'm getting at is here, you might not be talking about like maintainability of the code. You might be talking in a language that's more in your world, this prospective world of Series A startups. You are going to help them create, let's call it pivot friendly code bases or something like that. And now, if you have a lot of experience in this, you have a lot of experience navigating around companies through various pivots, or rapidly responding to new market developments. ChatGPT just came out, and everyone in the venture-backed world suddenly needed to have some AI functionality, however nominal and farcical, and you made that happen or something. Whatever the case may be, being more specific about that target market, that target persona, starts to let you be more specific about the value prop. Series A companies looking to raise their next round or looking to, really solidify and get product market fit have a much different set of needs than like a product team in the enterprise. And so once you understand what those organizations care about or what those product teams care about, it gets a lot easier to tout your experience and sell into them. So if we're talking about A round companies, you can start to come with language like I help you make decisions that enable pivots when necessary, and also can, accommodate the next round of funding that you're going to raise, whatever that might look like. So that's going to get those early stage founders' attention a lot more than just general talk about maintainability. The last thing I would say here is, in addition to zooming in on the persona, which will help you zoom in on the value prop, you also want to zoom in a little bit on like what decisions are we talking about. So is it what libraries to adopt at the inception? Is it how to structure the code base? Is it, something that I'm not thinking of? Is it like what, I don't know, tools to use or something that aren't like libraries in the code, but like, what editor or IDE or something like that? All of those things are, just examples that are occurring to me off the cuff, but like I don't materially know what decisions we're talking about. You would need to make sure that the decisions you're talking about are going to like echo in the eternity of this code base. So if you're talking about deciding whether to use, like editor A or editor B, that's not really going to matter that much. It's an easy switch later. Are you talking about things that happen in the early going that are going to be cast in granite for the rest of the application existence? Whatever those may be, because I don't really know what we're talking about. Decisions is pretty broad, but you want to be sure that the decisions are something that you can market from a fairly compelling point of view. So I would just do a double check that the decisions you're talking about aren't easily reversed in 6 months. Otherwise, who cares? We can always revisit this later. So make sure that these decisions not only matter in the moment, but they have a lot of long-term ramifications for this persona and as it pertains to your value proposition. So I would do all this and then kind of leave off maybe with the advice that's probably becoming somewhat standard when I'm doing niche evaluations. So iterate on these things as you go, try to land clients. And as you get more specific, it might get easier, if not to land clients, to at least have market research conversations. So as you start to zoom in on these things, iterate towards the business that you'll have, the niche you're going to fill, the way you're going to fill it, et cetera. Iterate towards it, not only by doing work, but also by having market research conversations. So for instance, let's say that you had, the one I randomly picked, venture-backed startups. Even if you're not selling business outright, start seeing if you can get on the calendar with some founders that have just raised their A round of funding, and ask them, hey, you've got a front end code base. What decisions maybe during the course of your seed round of funding were you really grappling with? Ask them about like what hiring looked like, how they made that decision, if they trust their engineers and their newly hired architect to make important decisions. Just kind of pick at some threads there and see what their world is like. What pains did they have? What decisions did they really sweat? What decisions did they struggle with? What decisions do they regret? It's pretty easy to tee up market research conversations if you're, don't turn it into a thing where you turn around and try to sell them something. But if you just say, hey, I want to pick your brain, you've gone through, this gauntlet and gained valuable experience that I want to understand. To that end, if you can get the conversations, you could talk with more mature companies that have been through that, or you could talk with companies that are really nascent and see what decisions they're afraid of. But my point is, with all of this, you can iterate by delivering business and seeing how that goes, but you can also iterate by just having conversations with your target market, seeing what they value and what they don't, what they would pay for and what they wouldn't, et cetera. So, and by the way, those market research conversations also help you kind of triangulate as to whether you've zoomed in too far or something. Like you can get too specific on a persona, and if you can't find anybody that even fits the bill, it's easier to discover as you go, especially if you're trying to have listening tours and market research conversations. So hopefully that makes sense. I do think there's promise to this. I think you're, just to recap, you're going to want to get a little crisper on who these product teams are and how they came to exist and why they're fledgling and all that. So tighten that up a little bit. Definitely going to want to tighten up the value proposition, because as articulated, it's kind of generic and it's not really going to resonate with anybody. And then finally, zooming in on what decisions you're going to help them make. If you do all of that, I am confident that some combination of more specificity with those vectors is going to lead you to something that would be a viable business for you, especially as you get more reps and experience talking about and delivering that. I think you could very well be onto something here. So hopefully that is at least somewhat helpful and interesting, and I will catch you all next time.